We just went live on our event today that hosted with the US-Qatar Business Council, FinTech Chicago, the support of the Embassy of the State of Qatar in the United States, and our distinguished guests. I believe our audience are coming in live right now. I see almost over 50 and it's counting up. So in few seconds, we'll start with the formal introductions. And we have our guests in here, His Excellency Nasser Ibrahim Al-Lingawi, the Consul General of the State of Qatar, Mr. Yusuf Al-Jida, the CEO of Qatar Financial Center, as well Mr. Abdulaziz Al-Khalifa, the CEO of Qatar Development Bank. We have as well Mr. Fahd Al-Dosari, Qatar Commercial Attaché in Washington, D.C. And we have as well our moderator, Randy Rivera from FinTech Chicago, and our distinguished CEO, Ms. Amy Nicholas from Anthemis. She's calling from New York today. So we're gonna go in a quick introduction, the business opportunities that we will discuss today, and our distinguished guests will talk about FinTech, the FinTech industry, how Qatar has been managing to do more in that sector, the initiatives, the planning, and so on. Experts and our speakers that will highlight these advancements in Qatar, and as well success stories in the state of Qatar, and our moderator who is very familiar with this industry from Chicago. So I will start right now to introduce His Excellency Nasser Ibrahim Al-Lingawi, Qatar Consul General in the state of Qatar. Mr. Nasser joined as a Consul General for the state of Qatar in January 2018, and he's based in New York City. Before that, he was the Director of the Ministry of Economy and Commerce, then in Ministry Office in the WTO in Geneva, in Switzerland, with over 13 years of comprehensive experience in the sector of economy, trade, and business. He forged strong and enduring relationships during his service in the office, and he's very familiar with the trade relations and the treaties and the expansion of economies and businesses. I'll turn now to His Excellency Nasser Al-Lingawi to give us our keynote opening speech.
Thank you, Mohammed. Everybody can hear me good? First of all, good evening for our dear colleagues from Doha, and good afternoon for our colleagues in US. Friends and colleagues, I would like to start by thanking the US-Qatar Business Council and FinTech for organizing this event, and by thanking each of you for joining us today during these challenging times. The impact of COVID-19 on the business community has been considerable, and I know that your companies have been working extraordinarily hard to navigate the crisis. So I deeply appreciate your taking the time to participate today. I'm particularly happy to have this conversation, though, because it gives us a moment to pause from our steadfast focus on current challenges and look forward to a brighter future. To be sure, COVID-19 has had a significant impact in Qatar, just as it has in the US and around the world. Our government have worked aggressively to respond, and we have been fortunate to have among the world's lowest fatality rate from the virus as a result. But the human and economic toll has nevertheless been significant, just as I know it has been here in the United States. Qatar expressed its deepest sympathies to the American people. But we in Qatar are confident that a better future will come, because we are confident that through our collective effort globally, we will overcome this challenge. In the US, I've seen firsthand so many examples of the tremendous will and perseverance of the American people. From my past visit to Chicago, I know that those traits are particularly strong in the people of the city because of this strength of character. I'm confident that we will soon work through this difficult time to reach a brighter tomorrow. And I can assure you that in Qatar, the future is bright, particularly for the economy. The government of Qatar is not alone in this view. As you may have seen, the IMF projects that Qatar is the only country in the region that will have a budget surplus this year. International rating agencies have repeatedly reaffirmed Qatar's outlook, even as they downgrade our neighbors. We look forward with a great anticipation to the FIFA World Cup in the late of 2022, and even as we expand our oil and gas industry with billions in a new investment scheduled in the coming years. We are rapidly diversify our economy into a range of sectors. One area in which we see particular promise in Qatar is the financial sector, and specifically financial technology. Qatar is well positioned for growth in this area, and we are fortunate to have today representatives of Qatar Development Bank and Qatar Financial Center, two key stakeholders in the industry, who will be able to detail for you the range of incentives, support, and opportunity available to companies in the space operating in Qatar. Proudly, I can assure each of you that the government of Qatar is deeply committed to the success of this industry in Qatar. I'm sure you will hear about some of the steps the government's taken to ensure the success here today. We are especially excited about working with US firms, though many of whom are already active in Doha. The US private sector has been a key partner in Qatar development for years, and Qatar is deeply invested in the United States as well. Our economic bond from the foundation of a relationship between our countries that is more than an alliance or a partnership, but in fact a friendship. The government of Qatar welcomes the opportunity to strengthen our foundation of this friendship through increased economy engagement, which we are confident will be highly beneficial for both of our countries. With that, I will allow our distinguished speakers to proceed. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I appreciate it, and thank all our guests. I'll go to Mr. Randy Rivera, Managing Director for FinTech, to kick off our panel today.
Great. Well, thank you, His Excellency, and thank you, Mohammed. It's really been a pleasure coordinating and planning for today. On behalf of FinTech, our community here in Chicago and in the US, I want to extend a warm welcome to the listeners from around the world. We want to thank the teams of all the organizations that have been mentioned and have helped make today happen and prepared us for a successful conversation about what looks to be a bright future for FinTech in Qatar. As you'll hear today, collaboration is at the root of the work that is being done on multiple fronts in Qatar to attract talent and networks that can capitalize on the opportunities related to innovation and technology and financial services. From a FinTech ecosystem perspective, we see an economy that is uniquely positioned for success. Some housekeeping matters for this call. First, while we'll be muting the lines to allow for the speakers to speak, please feel free to submit questions through our Q&A tabs. And we kindly ask that if you are part of a press publication and would like to be recognized as such, that you identify yourself and your question. Second, in line with the broad support and collaboration across the various organizations on this call, the rest of the call will allow for the speakers to present and then field some questions that we have prepared. We will do that 3 times and then open this up to the floor for additional questions. We recognize this session may be a little longer than your conventional webinar, but trust me, the Qatar story and the thoughtfulness they have exhibited in planning to make Qatar a global destination for FinTech warrants the extra time. Last, FinTech is excited to be a part of this because we view ourselves, our members, and the industry as an interconnected part of a global ecosystem. It is exciting to see new markets enabling the growth of our industry, and we look forward to having today's conversation kick off additional collaboration. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Mr. CEO of the Qatar Development Bank, Mr. Abdulaziz Al Khalifa. Mr. Al Khalifa.
Hello there, Randy.
Hello.
Well, let me start by thanking you, Randy, thanking Mohammed and the rest of the team for all the great efforts that they've been doing. The US-Qatar Business Council for all the great efforts. I've been also an attendee for some of the other sessions, the amazing sessions that they've done. So congratulations for the success of the previous sessions. And I hope that this will be beneficial for everyone who's listening. Good morning to everyone, to our friends in the States, and good evening to my colleagues from Qatar. We hope that this will be useful. I have a presentation. I hope that it could be shown on the screen. I think Amanda is helping me with that. So if we go to the first slide, I'd like to start by talking to you about Qatar Development Bank in order for this to make more sense. So for those who are not very familiar with us, we at Qatar Development Bank are a multi-factored government organization mandated to promote the development of small and medium enterprises and the wider entrepreneurship ecosystem in the states of Qatar. We have a toolbox that includes a diverse range of financial and non-financial products and services. We aim not just to develop and empower the Qatari entrepreneurs, but also to ensure that they are very competitive in both domestic and international markets. We do that with different tools, be it access to funding, be it access to markets, be it access to information and training. And we run, for example, one of the largest incubation centers in the Middle East. It's called Qatar Business Incubation Center. And we also at the same time focus at sub-sectors where we empower entrepreneurs. For example, we have a sport technology incubation and acceleration program that we run with the local 2022 World Cup authority to ensure that technology-related sport entrepreneurs and companies could actually start up in the country and be able to provide their services and compete both in local and international aspects. Following slide, please. While we're doing this, I'm very also proud that we've worked hand in hand with different entities within the government, and we've started a FinTech task force almost 2.5, 3 years ago, with also the participation of Qatar Financial Center. And with that into consideration, we've taken a wider look at the local financial services ecosystem. And from there, we at Qatar Development Bank, we envisioned that we will create a FinTech hub that will be able to compete locally and internationally to attract like-minded individuals and entrepreneurs. We, at the same time, as Qatar Development Bank, we're also envisioning that we will become a lighthouse when it comes to a digital development bank for the future that will become more of a lighthouse for the whole region. While we're doing this, we, as I've stated, we're becoming a role model as a QDB, as a bank. At the same time, through our digital FinTech hub, we'll be able to serve and help entrepreneurs who will be able to serve locally and the region and hopefully compete internationally. The following slide, please. Together with our partners, we went through a journey of learning from other FinTech hubs, understanding the strength that we have and also the weaknesses, as well as setting our priorities. As a result, we have developed a national FinTech strategy. I'm glad to state that our strategy is coming live in the form of FinTech regulations and a sandbox by the central bank, an announcement of Qatar FinTech Hub, including the FinTech incubation and the FinTech acceleration program, and a number of other initiatives that will follow. As you can see from this slide, our FinTech strategy aims to transform Qatar's financial services sector into more of a vibrant and globally competitive industry, as well as solve some of the local and global challenges by leveraging on FinTechs, which we believe will be more than capable to solve such challenges and add more value. Following slide, please. We're very aspirational, and we aspire to build a globally recognized FinTech hub and connect like-minded hubs and organizations and regulators from across the world, and to be at the forefront of the future of FinTech. And to do so, we aim at leveraging the strength of all members of the Qatari FinTech ecosystem, including the regulator, the public and the private sector institutions, as well as global partners. Following slide, please. As I've mentioned earlier, our FinTech strategy aims to enable the creation of interconnected and collaborative FinTech ecosystem. This interconnection is more of a prominent importance because I've mentioned in my previous slide, we would like to become more of a kind of a global FinTech bridge. Therefore, to explain it in a better way, that collaboration with international partners is more of a vital importance to us. And this will be further explained in the following slide, please. So in addition to the hubs, we are also onboarding a wide range of partners as part of our ecosystem. This is a snapshot of our existing and potential partners. We're very proud that our network of partners is growing as we speak. As you can see from this slide, our network partners range from financial institutions, academia, big tech, fintech hubs, payment networks, and media. We will continue to build on our networks. In fact, I hope that this webinar by itself will pave a way for a new and mutually beneficial partnerships, inshallah. Following slides. To attract the best talent, we have put together a comprehensive package of financial and non-financial incentives. In addition, we're coordinating with key public and private sector partners to ease the path of fintechs to establish and grow in Qatar. We'd like to ensure that our fintech receives the required support so that they can focus on their innovative solutions and be able to start, grow, and expand internationally from their base in Doha. Following slide, please. As I've mentioned earlier, we are in a delivery mode of our fintech strategy. Therefore, I'm very glad to announce that we have started accepting the applications for our inaugural wave of the incubation and the acceleration program. I feel very particularly excited that we have already started receiving these applications and inquiries from great and diverse number of fintechs. Given also the unfortunate outbreak of the COVID-19, we will run our first wave in a virtual format, but we are confident that it will not prevent us from offering one of the best in-class services. As part of our outreach campaigns, we will be running a FinTech webinar on June 30 to be followed by our first hackathon, which will be taking place on July 23rd. Following slide, please. As part of our FinTech strategy, we have prioritized 4 key areas, which include Islamic finance, RegTech, payments, and SMEs. However, those are the broad areas that require a strong foundation. We call them enabling technologies. In our strategy, we have identified a range of such enablers, including AI, machine learning, distributed ledger technology, and others. However, to ensure the alignment with our regulators and regulations, to be more responsive to the needs of our ecosystem, our first wave of incubators and accelerator program will focus on payments technology. So if there is anyone on this webinar who's focusing on payments, this is the opportunity. Having said that, I would like to add that we are open to receive applications focusing in other areas, including SME tech and Islamic fintech and RegTech. Following slide, please. As I've mentioned earlier, we're planning many initiatives. I would like to encourage you to regularly visit our website, fintech.qa, and follow us on our social media channels. I would like to encourage you to apply to our incubator and accelerator program. I am sure that you will benefit a lot, and I'm looking forward to welcome you virtually and hopefully soon face-to-face in Doha to start your fintech and be able to grow them regionally also from Doha. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those great thoughts and the commentary. A couple questions, Mr. Al-Khalifa. It looks to me that you spent a lot of time researching around the world. And, you know, Qatar has a rich history of partnership and collaboration, not just on the diplomatic side, but specifically on the economic side. You're looking for best practices around the world. I'm curious, in the early days, what conversations you were having that really informed how you reached out to some of these partners around the world, and how that laid the groundwork for what you've put together as a strategy?
Well, Randy, to be frank, when we started searching around and talking to other like-minded fintech hubs globally, we've noticed that normally there would be different scenarios in different countries, and we've seen experiences where a lot of the talent exists, for example, in Singapore or the UK, so that fintechs would be more tailored towards providing services for the existing talent to start their fintech companies. So in our approach in Doha, we've changed that a little bit into involving more academia into our ecosystem and working very closely hand in hand with the regulators to ensure that we have a flow on the talent from the local market. At the same time, we've worked hand in hand with our dear colleague Yusuf and Qatar Financial Center to ensure that we can also create an offering and a compelling offering that will be able to attract international players. There are a lot of learnings, and everyone is still learning within that area. And this is why we've focused more on creating like-minded hubs. So we have a lot of relationships with other, I think we've signed with more than 12 hubs internationally, where we're actually offering also accessibility to information and training through this network. So we've learned a lot. We've spent 2.5 years, 3 years crafting our strategy, focusing our niche market, and understanding exactly how we could create one of the best globally FinTech incubation and acceleration programs in order to help the FinTechs and startups to be able to exist, flourish, and expand globally.
And that's evident in the conversations I've had with your team around specifically Islamic finance, which in FinTech in the States is something that I got to tell you, it's a new space that I'm hearing coming up in terms of conversations, but we don't have a mature market in that. I think there's a lot of learnings that we can have. So I've experienced that tone of partnership and learning. I'm curious, as you looked at some of these other partnerships with the FinTech hubs, which, if you had to say, here's 2 to 3 partnerships that have been uniquely helpful, could you maybe point to that?
So Singapore has been helpful in terms of partnership between them and us. Sweden has been helpful in terms of partnership between us and them. The UK, some of the other hubs also, Istanbul, Turkey, where we're actually exchanging the know-how. We know that also in Malaysia, they're doing a lot of Islamic FinTech companies. So we're learning and we're adopting. We're trying to understand what others are offering in their hubs also. In Indonesia, there is a lot of good work that they're doing also within Islamic FinTech. So it's Randy, it's a very ever evolving type of an offering when it comes to FinTech. And I think that at the end of the day, there is no single solution to all the issues. But this is where collaboration comes in very handy. We're a very open type of an environment. Our central bank is coming in line very, very fast. They're very adaptive. Their sandbox is coming online very soon. The regulations is going to be published very soon. And it's a very dynamic type of an approach that everyone within the ecosystem in Qatar is following. We're very responsive and a very dynamic environment over here.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, you mentioned all these countries around the world, and Qatar, you said, in a very interesting region. Qatar's gotten a lot of praise for being ripe for entrepreneurship, the right environment, the right culture. I mean, you've won international recognition for it. I'm curious how your geographic location and then your geographic relationships really play a part in what you see to be key elements of what helps you stand out as a FinTech hub.
Well, that's more of a question to my dear friend Yusuf that he could actually answer better than me. But I think that being in the center of connecting those, as I've mentioned, we have almost 12 agreements currently with international FinTech hubs. But I believe that we are centered and we are positioned in a very centralized place where we can actually offer a lot of services. And currently, as we're having our virtual meeting and a lot of the training that we're doing is virtual, a lot of those logistical boundaries are not actually there anymore. And I believe that the offering that we have in terms of accessibility to capital, accessibility to the infrastructure, accessibility to the support and the advice, being able to incubate, accelerate, register within QFC, and being able to expand globally is a very compelling offering that we have in Qatar, and it makes us very competitive. We've ranked internationally among the best when it comes to the entrepreneurship ecosystem and entrepreneurship readiness. And We were ranked the top regionally when it comes to entrepreneurship index by GEM, Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. We're very proud of the local entrepreneurs, but at the same time, we know that this is the right place for international entrepreneurs also to exist and to flourish.
Great. Well, appreciate your comments. Would like to keep the option open to come back with more questions, because I'd like to get to some more topics that I think are interesting or add to make this conversation even more, build on some of the good work you've laid already. Mr. Yusuf Mohammed Al-Jaida, thank you for joining us today. Would love to give you the floor. Maybe we can start with a little bit of a building on the answer of the question that I just asked, and then get to your presentation. I think that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Can you hear me? Just to check
can.
on the sound.
Yep.
Okay, quick introduction. My name is Yusuf Al-Jaida. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Qatar Financial Center. I want to thank my colleagues at the US-Qatar Business Council, who happen to be also a QFC client at the same time. Thank you for making this happen. I also want to thank my colleagues at the embassy, of course, His Excellency Nasser and His Excellency Fahad. Thank you for making the time. And of course, Amy and Randy. So thank you for being here. Did you want me to comment, or did you want me to jump into the presentation?
It's up to you. I'd say a quick comment would be great, but I'd love to get to that presentation as well.
Okay, so the Qatar Financial Center, as Mr. Abdulaziz, my friend, has mentioned, is one of the key stakeholders in Qatar's FinTech strategy. So we play a supportive role along with the Qatar Development Bank and the Qatar Central Bank as well. And I'll explain that in more detail in the presentation. But it's important to us from a QFC perspective to develop this sector. We believe there's a massive opportunity in Qatar and in the Greater MENA region as well. And I'll get into statistics during the presentation. One of our main mandates is to attract foreign direct investment, and FinTech is going to be one of the core areas and one of our core strategic focus areas, and hence my availability today and the presentation I'm about to make.
Great, thank you.
So without further ado, I think I'm going to check my tech here and download the presentation. Hopefully I'm getting this right.
Looking good.
Okay. So like I said, just as a quick introduction, one of our mandates is to grow the sector and attract international companies in multiple sectors, FinTech being one of the strategic focus areas for us as the state of Qatar, along with our other key stakeholders being Qatar Development Bank and the Qatar Central Bank. But to talk a little bit on the macro side, so why FinTech and what are the drivers from a macro perspective? And when I say macro, I mean the Greater MENA region. And why would international FinTech companies want to establish themselves in the MENA area versus other areas? And you know, the FinTech drivers in the MENA region boil down to 6 key drivers. The first one is consumer demographics. The MENA is over 300 million people, making it a very large market for international FinTech startups. And GCC countries are also very well known for having high GDP per capita, an average of $30,000 per capita. We in Qatar are a lot more luckier. We're triple that size at $70,000 per capita. And those GDP per capita are amongst the highest in the world. So consumer demographics are very important. Internet and payment adoption has been rapid in the region as well. There's very high internet penetration in the GCC. Some estimates put it at 94% of penetration. There's also a growing payment penetration, and we're seeing online payment penetrations in the GCC at around 76%, which is also expected to increase for the next coming decade. Sandboxes in the region have been developing very fast. There are currently 9 regulatory sandboxes that have been launched in the past 3 years only. And there's been several also government initiatives in the entire region for fintech companies that want to establish themselves in the region, and Qatar is also one of those. We've also seen a lot of private capital availability in the region. There's been more than 75 investors that have invested in MENA-based fintech startups. And we've also seen a massive government fintech funds in the region. There's currently 5 known ones. One of them happens also to be in Qatar, and those government funds are estimated to be around $1.4 billion US dollars. If we look at the statistics from a Qatar perspective, a micro picture, 85% of households in Qatar have a broadband connection. 54% of the population are young and are between 20 and 30. 50% of our population, which is around 1.4 million, use e-commerce platforms for their daily needs. And 88% of our population in terms of expats happen to be underbanked, which means there's a massive opportunity for fintech companies who take advantage of the first movers into the country. So from an opportunity point of view, we believe that the fundamentals make sense, whether it's from a Qatar perspective or whether it's establishing Qatar to access a bigger MENA market. And the statistics that I have shown basically confirm that there's massive opportunity for the next couple of years, beyond 2020, all the way to 2030, which is where most of the visions of the GCC countries are targeting. Key stakeholders when it comes to the fintech strategy in Qatar, the main 3, of course, like my friend has mentioned, is the Qatar Central Bank, the Qatar Development Bank, and the Qatar Financial Center. There's other, of course, ministries that are also involved in supporting the digital strategy, which is very much in line with the fintech strategy as well. The Ministry of Communication and Transportation, we have the Qatar Science and Technology Park, and Ernst & Young, who have been very helpful in terms of the research aspects of the fintech strategy. Just to define the main key stakeholders, of course, the Qatar Central Bank is the equivalent of your Federal Reserve in the States, so they manage all the monetary policy, but they are basically driving the regulatory aspect of the fintech strategy. So the sandbox belongs in the Qatar Central Bank. Of course, Qatar Development Bank was very well explained by my colleague, Mr. Abdulaziz. And when it comes to the Qatar Financial Center, we will be the licensing platform for a lot of the international companies who want to establish themselves. So your registry and your license will be gotten from the Qatar Financial Center when it comes to pursuing your fintech activities in the state of Qatar. Again, Qatar Central Bank, like I said, the orchestrator, the regulator, QDB, the sector developer, and we as the QFC would be the licensing platform. That gives you basically a perspective on all the key stakeholders you need to deal with as a fintech company who wishes to establish themselves in Qatar. Just to, of course, introduce the Qatar Financial Center, the way we are established is very unique for international companies. We are a financial and business center. Like I said, if your registration as a foreign entity and your license would be from the Qatar Financial Center. We operate under English common law through a very unique business platform which combines 3 different and independent institutions. The authority which manages the legal environment of the entire financial center, It's called the Qatar Financial Center Authority. We have an independent regulator called the Qatar Financial Center Regulatory Authority, who basically supervise all the financial activities within the financial center, meaning if you were a bank or if you were a regulated fintech companies, you'd also need an authorization from the regulator. And then last but not least, we have our own judicial system, meaning we have our own international court system and dispute resolution center, meaning all of your affairs would happen within the financial center in terms of rules, regulations, laws, dispute regulation, all your judicial needs and all your regulatory needs would be within one platform called the Qatar Financial Center. We currently have more than 950 international companies established in the financial center. And like we will see in the next slide, we have at least more than a handful of fintech companies that have been recently licensed when we launched the fintech strategy. So the way we will go about licensing you as a fintech company is basically through a broadened definition for fintech. And as you know, a fintech provider can either be regulated or non-regulated. If you are regulated, basically you're dealing directly with client money, or you could be providing loans, and that's more on the banking side of authorizations and licenses. So you'd have to get a regulated license by our regulator, but still within the Qatar Financial Center. Or you could do any of those activities on this slide, which basically is non-regulated, but is still within the fintech space. And if we were going to summarize this, we would be looking at providing cybersecurity solutions, for example, application programming interfaces, cloud computing, developing blockchain-based technologies, artificial intelligence, and internet-connected devices as well. So if you are a fintech company providing any of these activities, we would offer you a non-regulated license, meaning a very light touch license from a regulatory perspective. If you are going to go into payments and remittances, etc., or even providing digital loans, then we would work with you to get a regulated license or an additional authorization through our colleagues at the Qatar Financial Center Regulatory Authority. Just to summarize, I know my friend has gone through this, but these are the verticals that mostly make sense in the MENA region. Payments and remittances, of course, when it comes to payment processing, money transfer, remittance facilitation. There's been a growth in this area. In 2019, there was a growth of 15% on payments and remittances. And it's pretty much 45% of all the fintech activities in the MENA region currently. There's also InsurTech, which is insurance comparison and data analytics and online insurance sales. And there's also been growth in RegTech and real estate finance. RegTech, we've noticed a lot of growth in regulatory compliance, risk, and audit softwares. And when it comes to real estate finance, there's been growth in mortgages, alternative real estate investments, and financing. Of course, on the financing side, that's a bit on the regulatory territory, so we'd have to work with you on a regulated license. But Islamic fintech is an area that we believe is very much underpenetrated, as was explained by my colleague at QDB. But this is an area that's very underpenetrated and can basically grow massively for the next couple of years. And this is an area that we believe Qatar is very well situated to attract international companies who already have technologies and in general fintech, and who can Islamicize it and basically modify it for the region and tap into a whole new market of Islamic financial institutions in Qatar and in the region. some of the incentives that we've been able to offer immediately for some of the fintech companies would be, of course, waiving the fees, registration fees, and offering you basically free working space for the first year. But on top of that, we would work with our stakeholders, the QCB and QDB, in terms of allowing you access into equity or further incentives, OPEX incentives, for example, for your company. We would take it on a case-by-case basis for now, but in terms of fees and working space, that's something we would avail immediately upon your registration. Here are some of the companies we've recently licensed in the Qatar Financial Center. QPay is currently one of the biggest in the space of remittances and payments, but we've also recently have seen the licensing of companies such as Instamatch Global, which is a money markets fintech company. We've also recently licensed Finion Exchange, which is a Luxembourg-based trade finance marketplace, matching exporters with financial institutions in the state of Qatar. We also currently have a pipeline of more than 20 fintech companies, mostly global, from outside of the region, wanting to move in the region, and specifically out of the Qatar Financial Center. I hope that gives you a glimpse at what we are doing along with our other stakeholders in terms of fintech. And I thank you for your attention, and I'd be very happy to take any further questions on the topic.
It's really good, and it's amazing to see to the depths that you've gone. And one of the things that jumps out at me is, from a regulatory perspective, you know, this concept of non-regulated versus regulated is really something that is atypical around the world. I know in the Chicago, a lot of our startups, every state has different regulatory, different jurisdictions. Could you talk to us a little bit about how that came about and how your conversations came about with the regulators in your market to get them comfortable to create that flexibility?
Yeah, interesting question. You know, in order to jumpstart this whole initiative, we had to cut a deal with the regulators because, you know, a lot of these areas are gray areas, depending on whether you're managing the money or you're only facilitating for other institutions to basically allow their clients to access basically certain transactions. So like we've seen on one of my slides, we've had to break it down and learn on a case-by-case basis. A lot of the unregulated activity, like I said, has to do with providing the technology rather than basically receiving client money. So we would have to, some of these areas are not straightforward. You'd have to sit with basically the businesses and understand exactly what they want to do and whether we can fit it into a non-regulated box. And those are only the 6 boxes I just mentioned in terms of activities, of course, came about with discussions with the clients. But on top of that, we would have to basically go back to our regulator and basically also tick the box and make sure they're comfortable in terms of allowing these companies conduct those activities. But again, it's a continuous discussion. We learn as you go. You know, sometimes these discussions can take a very long time with the regulators, but if we basically convince them that this is a company basically coming in, providing a technology without basically doing any regulatory activity within, you know, providing credit facilities or even taking deposits from clients, especially when it comes to digital loans or even remittances. There's a difference between facilitating a remittance or basically receiving payment to conduct a remittance. And both of these companies could be fintech companies. So you'd have to make sure that the regulator is convinced that there's no touching of client money when it comes to that particular fintech activity. But like I said, the 6 activities I just mentioned is basically, I think, does it for us in the meantime. And when it comes to the bigger mandates, such as digital banks, it's going to be a lot longer discussions with the regulators. We've gone out there, we've attracted companies that want to do that, but that's not going to be a 2-week, basically, registration application, which is the case with a non-regulated fintech company. It's going to be something that might take you anywhere between 4 to 6 months.
Right.
And those, again, like I said, we're learning as we go, but we've been able to create this permitted activity called FinTech and break it down into boxes that fit within regulated activities and non-regulated activities.
Well, it sounds like you have a conversation, which I think is to be transparent, something in the States that we a lot of fintech ecosystems wish they had, that open dialogue. Because if you start with open dialogue, you can build the bridge towards progress. But I do understand that you've been able to draw those lines. That brings me to another question. It sounds like obviously the Middle East is known for other industries, not necessarily just financial services, but maybe you can speak a little bit about how financial services plays into the overall economy and as a corporate citizen related to other industries. And I think that this is one of the opportunities that you have in terms of attracting talent and ideas related to fintech innovation or financial service innovation, but maybe you can provide a little window into how critical a part of your overall economic system the financial service industry plays.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Qatar is known as basically being one of the fastest growing economies when it comes to exporting liquefied natural gas. So we're pretty much well known to be the biggest exporter of LNG in the world. We're not very well known to be a financial center as of yet globally. But what that tells you is that the infrastructure program that Qatar has embarked on for the past decade, which continues up to 2022 with the World Cup, all the way to 2030 with our efforts to diversify our economy. I think financial service is going to be playing and continues to play as we speak a very crucial role when it comes to financing infrastructure projects in Qatar. Our program for infrastructure investments since 2012 all the way to 2022 is estimated to be $200 billion. Now, a lot of the investments in infrastructure in the state of Qatar is pretty much run by the government. But in order for us to diversify away from oil and gas, we've recently enacted a PPP law, which would allow basically the government to go into partnership with the private sector to finance or self-finance a lot of these assets that the government needs to build. So, financial services currently represents 12% of our GDP. And 90% of our exports are still hydrocarbons. But there's extra surplus of cash in the country, which means wealth management is going to be playing a very crucial role in the next couple of years to basically manage those surpluses. FinTech within financial services, like I've explained earlier, is going to be an area of focus. So, financial services for us has been very niche in terms of focus. Our banking system is one of the most solid, basically, banking systems in the region. If you look at some of the estimates that came out from the IMF, our banking system is probably one of the few banking sectors in the region that's been able to continue to accumulate profits even within the COVID-19 situation. Our national bank, which is Qatar National Bank, is the biggest Middle East bank in the region, basically the biggest MENA bank in the region. So financial services will continue to play a very important role in terms of diversifying our economy away from oil and gas. We will continue to attract international financial institutions that want to do business in Qatar, but not only in Qatar. We want basically financial institutions to reach out to nearby countries and access their markets. We have very strong G2G relations with Kuwait, which is a neighboring GCC country, Oman. We have very solid relations with Iraq as well, Turkey, and we're looking at areas such as Pakistan and Southeast Asia. Our carrier, the Qatar Airways, flies into all these countries on a daily basis. We have an outreach to 180 destinations globally. So we believe focusing on certain niches will give us an edge in terms of attracting certain financial institutions in Qatar to access Qatar, but also access the region beyond Qatar. So financial services is going to be one of the sectors that will help Qatar diversify away from oil and gas. And it's a very crucial developing sector for us that we will continue to invest in, but also attract foreign direct investment into Qatar to help grow the sector.
Great. And you mentioned the exciting part, something not necessarily financial service related, but I think a key driver here. I'd love to hear you talk about the World Cup coming in 2022. And as you prepare for that, you know, how you see FinTech playing a role in that, in that experience. And then what do you think is going to make it different in Qatar versus previous World Cups? Because I think that's one of the things that generally drives a lot of different behaviors in cities it's been at around the world.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, you know, we've announced early on as well that Qatar wants to focus on the sports sector, not because of the World Cup 2022, but of course, 2022 has been an enabler for all that. But we've always wanted to create a vibrant sports sector in the state of Qatar. And we believe that there are massive opportunities for FinTech companies to also tap into this. We're seeing a lot of international companies currently discussing aggressively with Qatar to capitalize on these opportunities. An example would be the recent visit of the Lord Mayor of the City of London, who's confirmed that there will be more than 30 UK firms visiting Qatar shortly to talk about you know, opportunities in security training, crowd management, digital services, you know, cybersecurity and artificial intelligence within the sports sector. But if we look at, you know, opportunities within sports for FinTech companies, I think the market is sizable. There's, you know, more than 25 billion riyals of valuations for facilities, sport facilities management. There's opportunities for sports education, sports medicine, sports tourism, and data and analytics as well. When it comes to also, you know, the World Cup itself, I think, you know, there's going to be massive opportunities for, you know, fan engagement strategies, e-sport marketing and media, venue management, ICT. So I think, you know, within 2022, a lot of the FinTech companies will basically have an opportunity to provide their services before the World Cup and during the World Cup. And I think it's a first mover's advantage when it comes to FinTech companies. We're seeing a lot of companies currently, at least in the media sector, also positioning themselves for World Cup 2022. I've seen 2 Swiss companies, broadcasting companies already established in the QFC, establishing themselves, positioning themselves for the World Cup. Esports is another area that I think could massively benefit from this as well. So yeah, the World Cup has always been, you know, the driver of all the initiatives currently happening in Qatar. But even beyond 2022, I think, you know, the opportunities in Qatar will continue. Our national vision was up to 2030. A lot of the infrastructure projects that have to do with the World Cup currently are up and running, including, you know, 70% of the stadiums. The metro is up and running, not currently running because of COVID-19, but is running in terms of infrastructure. It's the project is finished. Will reopen soon with phase 2, which is supposed to be phase 3 actually, 1st of August. But a lot of the infrastructure projects for the World Cup 2022 are ready, built. And I think, a lot of the businesses will start positioning themselves for World Cup 2022. I think fourth quarter of this year, hopefully, if all the air travel restrictions are lifted and life goes back to normal.
Great. Well, it seems that it's nice when you have the balance sheet as a country and you've got solid plans and partnerships in place, so you're able to capitalize on them. So you're all prepared. I want to get to Amy, but I can't leave without asking you about COVID and asking you how that's affected, what you guys are doing. It sounds like you guys, again, everyone that I've interacted with has feels good about the futures despite, but maybe you can give us a perspective into how you feel today about the next 6 months.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no doubt that it's a challenging time for the for the entire world. I mean, the global economy, according to the IMF, is about to see a recession. In 2020. Some of the reports say that's even worse than the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. There's depending on which economist you talk to or who do you listen to, you could have a V-shaped recovery or half a V-shaped recovery or no recovery whatsoever. I think only time will tell when it comes to the global financial situation. But in terms of the measures that we've taken immediately is, of course, in line with other initiatives globally, is to support our private sector. And the main driver of this initiative was Qatar Development Bank, who was able to provide at least $1 billion of loans at very low interest rates, close to zero, to pretty much all sectors that have been impacted by COVID-19. So that was towards SMEs and private companies. Whether you're a restaurant or a coffee shop, you can basically submit to Qatar Development Bank. And correct me if I'm wrong, my friend, but there was $1 billion of credit available for companies impacted. But on top of that, our government also through the central bank was able to avail 50 billion riyals, that's around $12 billion of repo for the banking sector at zero rates. There was a 10 billion riyal, which is around $2.5 billion of capital towards our market, which is Qatar Exchange, to ensure that the market doesn't go through a very volatile period at the beginning of COVID. And if you look at our index, we've been actually one of the best performing indices during the COVID-19 situation compared to other GCC countries. But on top of all these measures, I mean, if you look at all the reports, they've been positive on Qatar. We're probably the only country in the region that's going to have a fiscal surplus. We are expected to grow in terms of GDP from $193 billion in 2020 to $231 billion in 2024. All the rating agencies, S&P, Moody, Fitch, they've all affirmed their rating with a stable outlook for Qatar. So economically, we're comfortable. Is there an impact? Of course, just like the rest of the world, there's an impact. But I think the measures we've taken have been in line with other European and US nations in terms of providing immediate support to the private sector, because the private sector has been the most impacted in terms of their businesses. Of course, our airlines has been impacted just like any other airline, but the government has made sure that they have availed, of course, any needs in the future post this era to allow basically our airline to start flying and to reach back to 180 destinations within the next 6 months. But only time will tell how much impact is globally we're gonna witness from basically the COVID-19 situation. Are we looking into a recession and then a recovery in the second half of 2021? I don't think you'd get the same answer from, if you ask two economists right now, you'd get two different answers. So we'll just have to wait and time will tell. In the meantime, we'll just have to continue to support our private sector and make sure that we can basically make it through the next 6 months until life comes back to normal.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rajada. I'm going to transition over to Amy Naujokas. Sorry, Amy. And from Anthemis. And I wanted to just take this opportunity, this last comment of you asked two people, you probably won't get the same answer. I've learned over the course of the last few weeks, you ask two people at the same company, you won't get the same answer of what the world's going to look like in 6 months. It's like everybody's kind of positing from what's important to them and what's relevant. So I'd love to, over the course of your comments, Amy, to get your thoughts on what you're seeing. But before that, you have a fascinating background, and you've been an active investor in FinTech, been a part of some investor groups of some of the names that we've all called our headlines. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and Anthemis, and then we would love to dive into kind of what you're seeing in the space. Obviously, you're familiar with the folks on the call as well.
Yeah, that absolutely. And thank you, gentlemen, for including me today. It's been a great honor and privilege to listen to all of you and to hear not only the consistency in what you're all seeing, but that it is very well aligned with what we're appreciating about the region. And as we sort of look to kind of the next generation for Anthemis and why the region is so important to us. So I am the CEO and one of the founders of the Anthemis Group. We are, as Randy has suggested, an early stage investor. We've been deploying capital now for over 10 years in the sector generally, financial services. And we built our thesis after kind of my founder partner Sean and I both came from large financial institutions and had spent most of our careers running various different businesses for big banks. We were seeing something circa 2007, 2008 that seemingly no one else was seeing, and now that sort of clearly becoming obvious to the rest of the world that what we were seeing was this sort of kind of evolution of transformation inside the financial services system. And we made a decision when we met at the tail end of 2007 that there would be an opportunity to invest in this, but if we spent the majority of our time waiting for the big banks to sort of figure it out, we might not take advantage of what we were seeing. And the thesis was pretty straightforward then, and it's still very clear to us now that the financial services sector is the most important part of our economy, and its financial health and its resiliency matters to almost everything that happens in the world. And so if we could build a platform and an ecosystem that helps support the growth of companies, digital models of companies inside of financial services, that we could play a big role in transforming the entire industry and really supporting the rest of the economy. And I think that, to your earlier question about COVID-19 and its impact, certainly I think we've been proven beyond right? The shocks that this particular incident has had on our financial system and our economy in general are magnificent. And they're magnificent for all the reasons we've talked about today, but also the number of people that they are disadvantaging around the world. And so when we think about kind of what that means, we think there's going to be a massive acceleration towards this. And some of the kind of pieces that you guys need to realize that's been happening even just since March 15th, we have in our 10 plus year history never had as many incoming phone calls from large global banks around deploying capital and strategically aligning. And we've been around for quite some time, right? We always kind of tease that we were FinTech before it was a thing, and certainly before it was cool. But a lot of the money that has been allocated to transforming this industry from the big corporate venture players and from the larger institutional investors has gone to later stage companies. And I think the market right now is desperate to start new companies, right? We're going to have so many people unemployed, and putting them back to work, we're going to lose a lot of companies. We're going to lose a lot of small and medium-sized companies around the world, but that's a huge opportunity to build new ones, right? This particular event, I think, has really transformed the way people look at the venture community and certainly the startup community. For a very long time, the gentlemen in Silicon Valley and at Sand Hill Road have had a lot of control over what gets built and why it gets built and how it gets built. And I think while we're individually going to be acting locally, there's now a massive opportunity to deploy capital on kind of a much more global scale, and that an entrepreneur in Qatar is as relevant as an entrepreneur in San Francisco. And being able to sort of identify, particularly for the financial services markets, where those ideas are coming from and how we capitalize them with the human and financial capital needed to accelerate them is going to give regions like MENA that haven't yet really evolved in the way that I think the potential is there to evolve. So we're super excited about it. You know, at Anthemis, we started our business really on 3 guiding principles. And the first was that we never thought that the financial services transformation was going to be revolutionary. We really looked at it as much more of an evolution. This is an industry that is, as all of you guys have pointed out, extremely complicated, massively regulated, and significantly global and interconnected, which means that for it to work properly, it has to be a collaboration amongst the people that are currently doing it and those who have new ideas, right? This is not sort of a moment where we just build one great startup and it kind of, you know, explodes the rest of the industry. This is going to take time and has been taking time and has been underway for now almost probably 15 years. And the thing that's changing now is that there's no more need to define that this has to happen. It's kind of a no-brainer. And it's about how do we partner to make it happen. And so one of the things that we continually get asked questions as we sort of think to regional expansion, certainly across MENA and to Qatar, is that we have this opportunity to kind of do things different, but also to do things right, right? There's not a legacy of old, bad built businesses that need to be reinvented, but instead we can have a really sort of open mind to kind of how the future really looks. And particularly post-COVID, that's, you know, a phenomenal opportunity. So I mean, I guess it's sort of easy to say that we're quite bullish around it. I also think that, you know, as we look to kind of how we design our thinking at Anthemis, we have a principle around not investing in bad, but focusing on the good. And I think that some of those, you know, the financial services sector is wrought with opportunities to make money, but to be able to do it and put money and capital to work for good and not evil is really important right now, because it's our responsibility as investors and as financial services professionals and those who really are focused on the core of our economy. We need to put people back to work, and we need to find opportunities to do it in a way that democratizes and provides access to capital for so many people that were left out previously and certainly were unfairly disadvantaged during COVID, right? And some of the themes that we're quite excited about are themes that I think will resonate incredibly well in the region. And so, you know, we continue to kind of look to kind of capitalize on that.
Well, Amy, I got to admit that you're probably going to get a quick follow-up call for me to join you on other panels, because I think you went through almost all the questions that I had. The good news is that you gave me stuff to unpack. You talk about Global Bank calling you for partnership, and I'd like you to speak to that in respect to the opportunity that we're seeing in Qatar and particularly the region. As you know, innovation theater is generally dangerous, right? Sometimes when times like this happen, everybody wants to be on the cutting edge of wanting to be playing in innovation. But as you look at this region and the real opportunities that sit there, when you think about the people that are calling you, how do you filter through that to make sure that the partnerships you're bringing to the table or to your team, as you look at opportunities, are really positioning you for more success? I think that I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key word in that question is about partnership, right? So for, you know, there was a period of time, and again, we've been doing this for eons now. So there's a period of time between 2008 to 2015 where most people couldn't even spell FinTech, right? And so the idea that a bank was going to give you capital or deploy capital in support of an evolution of financial services wasn't even a thing. But around 2015, you saw a significant number of folks starting to build these CVC units to deploy capital properly. And I think it was the right thing for them to do. But in large part, the focus was on strategic deployment of capital. And the challenge with that, you know, at any big organization is that if you knew what was going to be strategic to your business 5, 10, 20 years down the road, you wouldn't need something different to go and invest in it, right? You would have already built it. And so the idea that there is a kind of financial versus a strategic return when you're looking at these long we don't look at transformation that happens over 2 years. We look at transformation that happens over 10, 25, and 50 years. And also banks and big organizations generally, they're not set up to be nimble and to be able to deploy in the early stage the way that a traditional VC would be. It's not in the DNA, right? You can't deploy capital. Sometimes it's easier to deploy $5 million worth of capital than it is 500,000, and that's not useful when you're trying to get into nimble early stage deals. But I think the most important thing that was happening around this time is you had people feeling like, oh, I can do this better than you. Don't worry, we don't need you. We have plenty of money. But it's not about the money, right? There's plenty of capital available. It's about the ingenuity to figure out, A, where to invest, to do it quickly, but then to remember that these startups are trying to reinvent the big banks in many cases. And so why would they want money at the earliest stage before they have a product, before they have a real market fit, before they have revenue that could potentially detract or deteriorate what it is that they're trying to do, right? And so what we started to see in 2017-18 is that there was a bit of a flip, which is, yes, actually, we do know what we want to do. Yes, we do have capital to deploy, but actually we probably need some help figuring out how to do it as a partner or kind of just in the early stage. And so for us, we look for people who actually are a little humble to kind of what's come before, but also that are willing to write the checks, right? Because it's one thing to kind of sit around and talk about how we're going to deploy to change the world, but then it's exactly as you suggest, corporate theater. But there are a lot of players out there, and I think we have I have an envelope that has the names of that. If anybody ever found it, I'd be in big trouble. But it has the names of the banks globally that I think are going to be around in 10, 15 years, and it's not exactly the names you would imagine that others might think right now are the players.
Yeah, I have a hunch that list is also a list that the other folks on the call have as a short list of friends that they look at to build out the fintech sector. Can we talk about just on the flip side, the market dynamics of Qatar are really unique. They have a huge expat population. Obviously, you've heard on this call the relationships that they have with several governments around the world and different fintech hubs. From a founder perspective, you talk to them all the time. I'm assuming that you speak to them in the spirit of mentorship and support. From a founder perspective, if I'm in the middle right now here in the States of coming up with a way to tackle one segment of the market, why should I, go to a market that I may not understand? How do you get me over the fact that all the numbers sound great, but change, especially in this environment after COVID, it's hard to process.
Well, and a big part of that is, again, about partnership, right? I think it would be impossible to imagine doing it alone, right? We wouldn't enter the region without proper guidance and without proper friends that can help us understand it, right? We have spent a lot of time over the last year, and we've not deployed a cent yet, right? Really building relationships and building allegiances and partnerships. And, I think that even some of the gentlemen on our call at QFC and at QDB, we've had regular conversations about doing things together. I think there's a lot of and we've always said this to early stage companies, that it's not about who you take your money from, because the money will get there. It's about what they can do once they give you their money, right? And where do you go from there? And so our commitment to our portfolio companies is always about being their guide. And so the work that we're doing now kind of to help some of our 100+ companies expand into the region has a lot to do with us building the ecosystem first, right? Because we built that ecosystem over 10 years in Europe and in North America, and now it's sort of 10,000 people wide, but it's not going to happen overnight in the region. And so we have to put in the work and recognize how much there is to learn from one another. And that's the most exciting part about starting something new like this, but it takes time, and I think if I were a portfolio company or an entrepreneur, I'd be really keen to work with my capital base to help me understand and appreciate how to dip my toe in.
Very, very good perspective. Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to go through some Q&A here in the spirit of efficiency of time. Feel free to jump up if you think that you have the best answer, because we've got all sorts of different questions, and I want to prioritize to get to some of the big ones that are thematic in terms of where they're going. First question is, more and more countries around the world are adopting blockchain technology. Although there are arguably different schools of thoughts around its future, Nonetheless, do you see blockchain technology becoming part of the FinTech ecosystem trend in Qatar? I know that we mentioned that as one of the initiatives, but could somebody maybe speak to how you talk about blockchain as a market and opportunity?
Hey, Randy. So maybe I'll jump in this.
Thank you.
Yes, blockchain, part of what we're creating as an enabler of the FinTech community within Qatar with infrastructure is actually distributed ledger through blockchain. And there are a few experiments that are happening currently within Qatar. Part of it is, for example, creating this movable asset registry and doing that through FinTech technology. So more and more, we see also entrepreneurs and SMEs that are actually created within that area. We at Qatar Development Bank have our own VC fund where we invest in startups, and part of the companies that we've invested into are companies that are going through creating a blockchain. So yes, it's an important area. The government is adopting the utilization of blockchain. We've seen a few startups and a few companies in the country, and we've seen few examples that the government is actually adopting.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Al Khalifa. Another question here about security. And so the question, can you speak to the security issues in light of the blockade of Qatar and by its neighbors? Does QDB have the liquidity or stability to support a new sector that is shown to be volatile? I know that we've referenced multiple times on this call the strength of the economy and the balance sheet, but could you give some real-time perspective into how you talk to both your citizens and your expats around the security issues and the implications they have from a business perspective?
I think the question have multiple angles into it. So security, Qatar is very secure in terms of we've been blocked by some of our neighbors, but we, of course, it's unjustifiable and unjustice type of an approach. We have been very strong. I think some of the statistics that my colleague Yusuf have mentioned earlier, Qatar has been growing year on year. We've been our private sector have actually grown even bigger. The blockade, the blockade actually have created more of opportunities locally for small and medium enterprises. Post the blockade, QDB have created some sort of a situation. And I'm speaking here in a candid way. We've seen how small and medium enterprises have actually managed to become the supplier of the local requirements and the local needs, which have worked we've seen industries in food security, we've seen industries in pharmaceuticals, we've seen, for example, Qatar is ranked now number 1 regionally and among the top 3 globally when it comes to food security. This came as a result from a strategic approach, and also this blockade have accelerated the factor of Qatar doing its best to ensure that the citizens and also residents within this country are receiving the best services that they can. At the same time, QDB we have a very clear strategy. Our liquidity is very strong. Yusuf have mentioned earlier in terms of the COVID-19 situation response, there have been a 75 billion Qatar Riyal stimulus package that have supported that has been focused towards the private sector. 3 billion Riyal of that is actually towards our small and medium enterprises to support them through this COVID-19 situation, which we believe that it will go through a survive, revive, thrive type of a situation. Maybe a V shape, maybe a W shape, maybe a U shape, not yet very clear, but nevertheless, we're here to support small and medium enterprises. We're here to support the private sector. We've been open to business all the time. Qatar have never missed a single shipment of LNG, even with this blockade happening on us. We're very open. I think Yusuf have mentioned how many destinations our Qatar Airways is reaching out to. We are a very prominent business hub for many industries within the region. We've been open to business. We are open to business, and we will always be open to business.
Well, I appreciate your comments and your feedback. It's again consistent with the transparency that we've approached you in this planning of this conversation. It's very clear that you guys are committed to that. So definitely appreciate that response. I have a different question here, and Amy, you might want to chime in on this one. But the question is, what is the biggest pain point in the financial services realm in Qatar to solve? So Mr. Al-Jaida, I'd love your perspective from what you're seeing in terms of the local market. What are the demands the consumer has? But Amy, contrast to that, in other markets where this digitization, this acceleration towards embracing technologies happen, as a follow-on to the local story, where do you see different pockets that maybe you think would be interesting to invest in? But I'd love to start with you, Mr. Al-Jaida. Sorry, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so you know, on one of my previous slides, I've mentioned that there's a huge underbanked population, and a lot of it is amongst the expat population. 1.4 million was the figure I showed on my slide, but a lot of, you know, there's 70% of our population is made up of blue-collar workers who basically contribute to the development of our infrastructure projects in Qatar. But imagine basically allowing fintech companies to basically penetrate through that unbanked population in Qatar alone, and multiply that by 10 times and reach out to other MENA countries around you, which also have a heavy labor component to blue-collar composition to their working force. So payments and remittances, I think, is an area that's growing massively. But you know, even if you look at InsurTech and RegTech, these are areas that have been untouched and pretty much are you know, from a Qatar perspective, are virgin areas that, you know, I think the first mover into those areas would be making, you know, a big bang on their buck and a huge return on investment. So the opportunity is massive. You know, all the figures indicate that, you know, it's an underpenetrated market, but it's a population that is heavily involved in e-commerce. We have the highest rates of basically internet usage in the world as a GCC region. So, you know, you do the math. I think there's a massive opportunity right there just by looking at the figures. Yes, you know, a lot of people don't understand our region, and that's why, you know, their decision-making process has been longer than expected, but that's where we come in. I mean, you know, conferences and webinars help basically spread the message and, you know, tell people that this region is not just an opportunity, but is very well positioned to attract foreign direct investment, specifically in fintech.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with a lot, certainly with the specific regional and Qatar approach opportunities. And I think for what you said, the pain points to me also create the biggest opportunities, right? So the unbanked, for sure, the access to capital. But I think the SME point that someone made earlier, right? This idea that we've got this kind of, you know, natural clogging up of process when big banks can't actually do what the challenger banks can do really easily. And I think we saw that during this particular period where people were trying desperately to get access to capital but couldn't open them at the big banks all around the world, and that the challenger banks became the sort of opportunity. So I think a lot of the themes that we're seeing kind of at a global level have an impact on the region as well. The one thing that we probably haven't talked about much today that we're seeing and we feel very strongly about, have a lot of conviction for, is the concept called embedded finance. And I think someone on the call made a point earlier to sort of talk away from financial services, what other industries look interesting. To us, none of them are actually that far away from financial services, right? So when you invest in fintech, you can invest the traditionally way into a payments business or into a consumer finance business or into a lending business or a credit card business. Or you can invest in a vertical that relies on the financial layer to support that industry, right? And so if you think about that, that means anything that has a transaction or payment layer, anything that has a finance and lending layer, or anything that has a risk management and insurance layer, which means we sort of see opportunities, massive opportunities in the media space, for example, right? How do you finance and bank social media influencers who are not accessing capital, but are using likes and followers to essentially create an economy unto themselves? Or in the e-gaming space, where these entire economies are being created, real money is transacting, they behave like a regular financial economy. And it's, I think, going to take the leaders of financial services to truly understand those market structures and those businesses. We see similar things in the mobility space, energy, and very excitedly education and healthcare and wellness as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We have several more questions, which shows the type of engagement we've had, but I also want to be respectful of everyone's time. First and foremost, so what we're going to do with the questions is we're going to follow up with them offline. You can capture them and try to summarize them. A lot of them are how to get contact with individuals to follow up on questions they have specific to the program or how to apply. Some are unrelated to FinTech, but we're going to try to find a way to get to the Q&As as a follow-up to this webinar. I guess, thank you to everyone around the panel. His Excellency in New York, Mohammed, Mr. Al-Khalifa, Ms. Al-Jahida, and the commercial attaché, Fahad. We didn't hear from you, but we really appreciate your time. Amy, thanks for your perspective. As someone who is in FinTech before it was cool, I think that your voices are some of the ones I like to hear the most, because you have the scars to help us share, make sure that we're preparing them forward. The opportunities in Qatar, as I see them, are very, very high, very stand out as unique. The economy is so strong. It's clear from every element of the planning of this conversation that we have the right partners and across all the aspects of the economy, the regulatory environment, the support from the financial system, support from people that understand technology and innovation, and then international partnerships to help bolster. FinTechs couldn't be more excited to be a part of this conversation, and we look forward to sharing this with our membership and our relationships across the country. I'll turn it over to you, Mohammed. I don't know if you want to say anything else.
No, I would just want to thank you, Randy. Appreciate it, and for your organization, great work to get everyone here today as well. Everyone that worked on getting this event happening behind the scene, the staff of every single person that is here. And just one quick comment, any follow-ups as well, Randy, people that feel that from the US side, they want to get in touch with the entities in Qatar, Qatar Development Bank, Qatar Financial Center. There's the commercial attaché, Fadid Dosari, available, the embassy, the US-Qatar Business Council as well, both in DC and in Doha. So we thank everyone. We appreciate your time. I know it's getting very late now in Doha, so we'll let people get on with the night there. Your Excellency, Nasser, appreciate your being with us. Amy, great insights. And Randy, your organization, for great support, and we're looking forward to do more as well. Your experience and your questions made this event active and lively today. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Looking forward to have more events like this and more American companies going to Doha and establishing there, hopefully soon. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.